Welcome to Carnegie-Stout Public Library's virtual presentation of You're Better Than Your Mess with Rachel Hoffman, author of Cleaning Sucks and other books about organizing your habitat. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to see you. So we had a bunch of our patrons submit questions that we could ask you. So I'm just going to kind of jump right in with the Q&A and we'll see how this goes. So,
Sounds good.
All right. So the first question we have is, everything is such a mess that I don't know where to begin. That's totally my life right now. So I never really get started and things just keep getting worse. Do you have suggestions on where the best place to start is?
Well, I think honestly, that is probably the most common question that I get when it comes to cleaning up and getting organized and staying organized is people are so overwhelmed by the fact that sort of everything is a disaster that they just don't know where to begin. So in the case of a truly overwhelming environment, the first thing that I usually recommend is start with the stuff that has the potential to smell bad, which sounds a little bit ridiculous, but if you think about it, that's going to be your garbage, your dishes, and your dirty laundry. And once you have those things tackled, the entire landscape changes a little bit because those are the things that you really do need to kind of get out of the way before you move on to anything a little bit deeper. So I always say, if you're just kind of standing in the middle of an absolute disaster and you just can't think of where to start, grab a trash bag. Start with everything that is clearly and obviously garbage. If you can set aside for recycling, that's great too. Gather up your dishes, bring all of your dishes to the sink, and then your dirty laundry, get that all together and in one place. And once you have those three things squared away, I think the rest of the project becomes a little bit more manageable. So if you truly need a starting point, you just don't know where to begin, that's always you're never going to go wrong with that.
That's great advice. That's usually the first thing I do. I'm like, what smells bad? Let's get it out of the house. All right, our second question is, cleaning anxiety is very real for me. I get into manic cleaning, but everything builds up the rest of the time. My significant other is the same way, manic cleaning. I know you can't enforce change on another, but do you have any advice to help us implement these cleaning strategies?
So manic cleaning, or as I sometimes refer to it, marathon cleaning, is basically you get motivated all at once and you take a mess that has been accumulating for days or weeks or months and you tackle it beginning to end, top to bottom, all at once. It usually takes a day or a weekend or even longer. And by the end of it, you are so frustrated with the process because you've lost all of this time. You've spent your entire free time, whether that's your day or your weekend, just dealing with this mess. Because you find that you have that motivation, so you might as well just use it all up while you can, right? So one of the things that I really encourage people to do, especially if they get in this sort of this manic mindset, is to stop looking at cleaning as a marathon that you need to complete beginning to end, and just do little tiny sprints. Doing smaller tasks more often is a lot less difficult and a lot less mentally taxing than trying to do everything all at once. And you'll find over time, if you start building up the habits of, one of my big things is don't put things down, put them away, which is, it takes very little time in the moment. It's a couple of extra seconds at a time. But then a week later, you're not staring at a whole big pile of stuff that you just put down that you now have to deal with. So making that switch in your mind from cleaning as this huge, overwhelming project that takes days at a time to something that you can accomplish a little bit every day, I think helps to snap you out of that sort of manic mindset, because you're not associating cleaning with this gigantic project that's so hard to tackle. And along with that as well, the word manic, I kind of want to focus on that for a second as well, in that if you're only cleaning when things aren't great mental health wise, you start associating
Mm.
cleaning with not being mentally well. And that can be very damaging when you're trying to accomplish things, because you're looking at cleaning as a negative thing. You're looking at cleaning as something that happens when things aren't going well or when you're not feeling quite yourself. So I like to help people remove that sort of emotional component of it, because there is a very emotional component of cleaning for a lot of people, and to be able to say, okay, cleaning is something I can do all the time. It doesn't have to be this big project, and I don't have to be at the end of my rope to get started. I can just do a little bit here and there, and then I can stop. And the stopping to me is the absolute most critical part of it. Is, instead of saying, okay, I have to clean my entire house and everything has to be perfect before I get started again, to just say, I'm going to do 20 minutes. And if you can't do 20 minutes, I'm going to do 5 minutes, or I'm going to put 5 things away, whatever increment works for you, to be able to take this giant project and break it down into something a little bit more manageable will help switch that mindset of, I only clean, when I have this manic motivation.
Yeah, in my house, we call it mass marveling. So, you have a bunch of clutter everywhere and you're having company over. And so you do a mass marvel, which for me means shoving everything in a closet. And then you're like, oh, my house is clean, which is not true. So, all
Yeah,
right.
and the problem with that as well is that you're just pushing it off to deal with it
Yes,
another time.
it's
You're
it's
still
still
going
a
to have to
mess.
deal with it. Yeah. It's just
It's
a mess
still a
behind a
mess.
shut door now, and that
Exactly,
doesn't help.
exactly. So what is your best advice to help kids and teens get started on this cleaning and organization journey?
Well, I've done a lot of talking with people lately about kids and cleaning. I myself don't have kids, so I feel the need to stipulate that from the beginning. But when you talk to a lot of people who, as adults, have a hard time keeping their houses clean, and you ask them what their relationship with cleaning was as a child, you get a lot of very common responses, which tend to include, cleaning was a punishment, or if cleaning wasn't done properly, I was punished for it, or my parents really hated cleaning and it was this big task that we all just complained about and nobody was happy, and it was miserable, and they were miserable and I was miserable, and there's just all of this negative emotional association, with cleaning from childhood, and people carry that with them through to adulthood. And I find a lot of people who are having trouble with it as adults can look back on their childhood and say, oh yeah, that was a really unpleasant experience for me. So I think the first thing that I would recommend to parents is be very conscious of the behavior that you're modeling to your kids. If you hate cleaning and it's a drag and it makes you mad and you're frustrated by everything and you're always, slamming things and throwing stuff around and muttering under your breath, that's behavior that your kids see and will eventually emulate, because that's what you're showing them. So as hard as it can be, because cleaning is not fun, that's not, let's not, pretend that I'm sure yes, there are some people who enjoy cleaning, and I don't trust them and I don't know them, but there are some. But for the most part, cleaning is not fun, and it's just something that has to be done. So I think, as a parent, working with your kids to understand, okay, this is part of living in our home. Just like we sit down for dinner, you wash your face and brush your teeth before bed. Like, these are things that are not the most fun in the world, but it's part of being in this household. It's part of being in this family. There are ways to make cleaning a little bit more fun, understanding that kids are kids and they know when you're trying to make something not fun. But just being aware of the behavior that you're modeling for them, being aware of the language that you're using, as far as when you're talking about cleaning and keeping things organized. Also, separating cleaning from punishment is a big thing for me, because the more a child learns to associate those tasks with punishment, obviously the less they're going to want to do it, and they're not going to do it well. Which also leads me to, there's a very there's a learning curve associated with cleaning that I think people don't necessarily think about all that much. When you're, for example, you're teaching your child to read, there are different stages in their development as far as being able to read. There's age appropriate things that they can read. There are certain things that may inhibit their ability to read, whether that's a learning disability. There's a lot of things that have to do. And the process of cleaning and keeping a home organized, it's the same thing. It's the same steps. They have to practice. They have to do things that are age appropriate. They're not always going to be good at it. So a big part of it is sort of letting go of expecting adult quality work from children, which I think is a big part of it. Kids are not going to do things perfectly. And sometimes that's intentional. And sometimes that's just a function of their development. So I think being able to encourage them to do what they can do in a very age appropriate way will help them develop those skills into something that's a little bit more what parents are looking for down the road. When you're looking at, say, teenagers, you have this added component with teenagers, and that often they're jerks. Sometimes teenagers are a little bit rebellious, just because that's their nature. But again, there is still a developmental process that goes along with any skill that you're looking for your child to be able to develop at any age. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily expand that to keeping the house clean. You certainly acknowledge it with reading and with math and all of those other skills, but not some of the more practical skills that kids need to develop.
Yeah, my negative association is yard work. So I hated yard work. My mom, every year on Mother's Day, I do too. She was always like, for this year for Mother's Day, I would like for you to do yard work. And for me, it was always like, oh, do I have to? So yeah, that's like, I can see where that negative association with cleaning can correlate to other things as well. So,
and it carries through. I mean,
it does.
You may not think about it as an adult as that's the reason why, but it's a big part of it.
Yeah, it is. All right. So have you worked with adults with ADHD or traumatic brain injury who have difficulty with executing functioning skills like planning, task initiation, attention, and organization? And do you have any special suggestions for them?
Well, I think in the case of ADHD and other situations where people find themselves with executive function disorders or trouble with executive function, there's not a lot of resources, or there haven't been a lot of resources until fairly recently in examining how to adapt certain systems to work with that. So, for example, for people who don't have executive function challenges, you can say, go do the dishes. And in that person's mind, you have the whole list of things that need to happen in order for the dishes to get done. If you have trouble with executive function, go do the dishes turns into, okay, first you have to collect all of the dishes, then you have to get the dishes soaking, then you have to make sure you've got soap available, then you have to make sure you've got your sponges available, then you have to figure out where the dishes are going to go once they're clean, then once they're going to be put away, where do they go? So there's a much more complex set of steps that's involved that I think if you haven't had the experience of trying to break things down like that, the tasks themselves become very overwhelming because the expectation sort of socially is that you can say, go do the dishes, and people understand what that entails. So I encourage people, and everybody's different. Everybody's ADHD tends to manifest in different ways. So what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. And there are a lot of really good resources online. If you're on Twitter, there's a woman, she goes by Black Girl Lost Keys, and she has a lot of ADHD resources, especially around cleaning, that are extremely useful. But also, I think what's very helpful is, and you only have to do this once, is to take your common tasks and actually sit down and list out the steps that are involved in those tasks. Because once you have a better understanding of everything that needs to happen, you can say, okay, so on a bad day when I'm having trouble with executive function, doing the dishes is 10 steps. So I'm going to look at my list and say, okay, I have the energy to do the first 3. And you can do the first 3 in you're 3 steps closer to getting those dishes done, rather than just walking away from the entire project entirely, and saying, okay, it's too much. I can't handle it. Um, Also too, there's a lot of benefit in doing much smaller tasks just as you notice them. A lot of people with ADHD find that they need to have things very visible, because there's a lot of out of sight, out of mind that happens. So clutter tends to happen a lot that way, when you feel like you have to have everything sort of visible, and you know where things are. So being able to say in a moment, okay, here are my group of things, and is there a way that I can make this group of things a little bit more usable and still be able to access them in a way that I need to. Um, there's a lot of little tips and tricks as far as that, but I think just understanding that when you have challenges with executive function and ADHD specifically, that you're going to look at a lot of these tasks a lot differently, and that, I think, is the fundamental first step in being able to make that change, just to say, okay, there's nothing wrong with me, I just need to come at it from a different direction. When socially, you've sort of felt like something's wrong with you for a while, because why does everybody else find this so simple and I can't do it? It's not that you can't do it, it's that you need a different way of looking at it. So I think breaking things down into their very fundamental steps in a way that makes sense for each person is usually the easiest way to get started for that.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that we all need to remember that people learn in very different ways. Some people are auditory learners, some are visual learners, everybody, some people are good at math, some people are good at language. Not everybody is the same. And I think that we have definitely moved that way, as society evolves, that, people will learn in different ways. They have to face everything in different ways. And it's really good advice to remember that, so you don't get frustrated when somebody does something differently than you would do it.
Mhm.
So it's a learning experience for
It
all of
is.
us.
It is,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think too, even as we understand people's different learning styles and things like
Mhm.
that, it's difficult to extrapolate that to things that aren't academic.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I try to do, is to say, okay, all of these things still apply when you're dealing with cleaning your
Sure.
house. It's the same exact process. It's just
Mhm.
applied for something else.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So our next question is, what was a turning point or inspiration for your books and to share your methods with others?
So I'm a messy person. And well, now I say I'm a reformed messy person, but if you have been a messy person looking for resources, especially online resources, and especially back sort of in the earlier days of the internet, most cleaning systems are presented by people who are naturally very clean and tidy. And that's great, because obviously they know what they're doing. They have clean homes, they have something to emulate. They don't necessarily understand how the messy mind works. And for me, there was a long period of time where I was really looking very hard for resources that would work for somebody like me, that would work for somebody who works full time, or is a full time student, or, there seems to be a very narrow audience for a lot of the resources, excuse me, that existed around the time I started looking for ways to help myself get cleaned up. And the audience that most of these people seem to be talking to were very traditional nuclear families, looking at the mom who stays home and a couple of kids. And I started thinking, okay, well, that's not my life. And that also doesn't include people with mental illness. It doesn't include people with physical disabilities. It doesn't include people who, may still live at home with their parents, people who live in a dorm. There's all of these different living situations that I think just there was this big void in all of these different systems. And the people who were trying to tell everyone else how to clean didn't really understand that. Like I remember very early on, um, I wrote an essay that was about, the depression messy house cycle. And people were just like, wait, that's a thing? because it is, because no one had come out and said, okay, sometimes when you're in a depression, you create yourself a little bit of a depression nest around you, and things get really messy because you don't have the energy to clean up. So in trying to find resources for people like me, I discovered there weren't any. So I made one, and I took all of the things that I sort of learned by trial and error and by talking to other people. I checked off several of the boxes of people who I felt had been left out by traditional systems, but I also made it a point to talk to other people who also felt like there wasn't a system that included them. And I put all of that together in a way that tries to be very adaptable to different situations and to different circumstances, tries to be very accessible to people who may not feel that other systems are within their reach, that they may be a little bit too strict, or physically not possible. I mean, that's the case for a lot of people, is you just physically can't do the things, these very strict checklists and do this on that day. So for me, really the turning point was realizing that there was this big void in resources for, and I hate to use the phrase regular people, but there's a lot of people who didn't fit into the very narrow box that a lot of these systems were targeting. So my whole goal was to make a system that spoke to everybody else. And it's evolved quite a lot over the years. I've been doing this for just about a decade now. And, things have definitely changed the more I learn, the more I talk to other people. And it's great to see that there are other resources that are now coming available for people to use that didn't exist before. But primarily it was because all I saw was very naturally neat, clean, tidy people talking to people like themselves. And I couldn't find myself in that. I couldn't figure out where I fit in. So I just built something that would accommodate people like me.
Yeah, I remember a couple of weeks ago, I checked out this book from the library about organizing your closets. And I mean, it has beautiful pictures and so forth. And I was looking at it and I thought, yeah, that's not going to happen for me. Like, I don't have all this time to really organize my closet like that. But it did prompt me to say, I really do need to clean out some of my things, because I don't need all of these extra clothes that I never wear. So that kind of leads me into my next question, which is tips on determining whether to organize items or do a purge.
That's a big question, because clutter happens when you have more stuff than storage. And when it comes down to it, there are two solutions to that problem. One is more storage and the other is less stuff. So, it sort of oversimplifies the situation, but if you're finding that you've got too much stuff and nowhere to put it, it really comes down to, okay, is this stuff that I want to find a home for? Is this stuff that needs a home, that needs a place to go? Or is this stuff that I am just not dealing with, that I have in my possession and I don't want to make any decisions about it. So I'm just relocating it from place to place to place and not dealing with it at all. So I think being able to decide on an item by item basis, really, okay, so I have this thing hanging around. Is it worth hanging on to? Is it worth trying to find some place to store it? Or am I hanging on to it for a reason that could be something as simple as, I feel guilty getting rid of it. That's a big one. People feel really guilty getting rid of stuff. But yes, guilt is a very negative emotion, but so is the feeling that you get when you're looking at that thing that you just don't want in your house anymore. So you have to sort of decide, okay, is it even worth organizing? And I think if you're very honest with yourself about that, for a lot of people, the answer to that is no. I'm avoiding dealing with it. So even if you're expanding your storage and finding homes for things, look at the items. Are you using them? Is it something that brings value to your life? Is it something that is useful to you? Is it something that you enjoy having around? Is it something that you're just hanging on to because you don't know what else to do with it? And I think once you start getting honest with yourself about those sorts of things, the organize versus purge question makes itself very clear in a number of ways. And I don't necessarily advocate for minimalism as it's presented these days. I mean, minimalism is a very popular sort of thing to for people to try to achieve. And I think that's not necessarily, it shouldn't necessarily be your goal to get rid of as much stuff as possible. It should be your goal to have the things that you want to have around, the things that you use, and not to keep the things that are causing you stress, by not having some place to put them. And there's a lot of emotion just wrapped up in stuff. We're upset that we have so much stuff, or we're guilty getting rid of stuff. So again, sort of removing the emotional part of that and just looking at it from a purely practical standpoint, is this stuff I need to keep, or can it just go somewhere else? Can it be recycled? Can it find a better home? Do I need to hang on to it? And if it's something where you're like, okay, yeah, I legitimately like all of my stuff, and some people have a ton of things and they love it all, and that's great. But then you just need to, that's when you need to start looking at organizing and saying, okay, now is the time for more storage, or storage that makes more sense for how you're using these items.
Yeah, I think it's hard when sometimes you can have too much space for storage, and then you just think, oh, I
You
need
want
to
to fill it.
fill up this space. And then you're like, why do I have all this stuff? It's terrible,
Yep.
but I don't use it ever. So,
Yep.
all right. So the next question we have is, I have issues with my mental health and my roommates want me to clean my stuff up. However, I seem to have issues with getting started or just getting overwhelmed with even a single box. Can I have some advice?
So roommate situations are always complicated. It's just a fact of life. If you live with other people, and whether that's roommates who you just live with out of convenience, or if it's family members, or significant others, whatever the relationship is, the roommate component of it is always very complicated. And that's just a fact of life. But part of the whole social contract that we have when we live with people is that the space is shared, and we all have obligations as far as keeping that space usable for everybody who shares it. Um, and when you're factoring in a mental illness challenge, if you've got issues with depression or anxiety, and cleaning is difficult for you, that does add a layer of complexity to the situation. So my best suggestion would be to sit down with your roommates, and my first my first advice for almost anything like this is always going to be have a conversation, because so often these things are not conversations. They are passive aggressive notes being left back and forth. They are drawers being slammed, and dishes being put on somebody's bed, and all of this stuff. So I think having a conversation, okay, these are the expectations, these are the challenges. Can we meet somewhere in the middle? What situation do we have here, and what solutions exist for that? I think having that conversation first of all is critical. But as far as getting started for this person, I would suggest set yourself a timer, and make it a very workable amount of time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Something where at the end of it, you're done. You don't have to keep going forever, because again, there's that whole overwhelming giant project problem. But if you're saying, okay, so every day I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes, and because of my conversation with my roommates, I know that these are the priorities that they would like to see dealt with, whether that's my dishes, whether that's, items in the common areas, things like that, to be able to prioritize those things, which in a way it's a gift to be able to be told, okay, this is the priority. You don't have to make that decision for yourself, because there's a little bit of you get a little bit stuck on that sometimes, trying to think of, okay, what do I need to be doing? So I'd say it's unpleasant. Again, we're right back to cleaning is not fun. Most people do not enjoy it. But just like you have to get up and get ready and go to work, and do any number of unpleasant things, when you're sharing space with other people, that's part of it. So I'd say scheduling it into your day, just like you schedule your work into your day, or, anything else like that, will sort of help remove a little bit of that, you know, can't get started. Um, to be able to say, okay, this is what's expected of me. This is my contribution to my household, because it is your household. And I want the people I live with to also be able to enjoy living in the household. But again, I really encourage people to, and before it gets to the point of passive aggressive notes and slamming cabinets and things like that, to sit down and say, okay, listen, straight up, these are my issues. And your roommate say, okay, we understand, but this needs to get done. And I think usually at the end of those kinds of conversations, everybody understands each other just a little bit better.
I just had a flashback to when I was in college and I lived with 4 other people in an apartment that did not have a dishwasher. And it would get to the point where there were like 2 of us that did the dishes by hand and everybody else just threw it in the sink. And we got in these epic fights about it. And if we just sat down and had the conversation, it probably would have been a better situation.
I
But
and honestly, the best time to have the conversation is in the beginning of the living
yes,
situation. If that hasn't happened, the second best time is immediately, because it's not going to get better
no.
without having the conversation.
Fortunately, those people were still friends and we
Oh,
can laugh
good.
about it now. But at the time, it
Good.
caused a lot of problems.
Oh,
So
I bet.
all right. So another question we got was, how do I deal with cleaning burnout? Sometimes it feels like the to-do list never ends.
So one of the really unpleasant truths about cleaning is that it does never end. It's a cycle. It would be amazing if we could just clean things once and then they would be clean forever. But as we continue to live in our homes and use our items, things need to get cleaned again. So part of the whole philosophy that I try to teach people is that stop thinking of cleaning as one and done. Think of it as an ongoing situation. Think of it as a cycle. Think of it as something that you need to continue to do. Burnout happens when you feel like you should be done and you have to keep going. So if you can switch the mindset away from, but wait, I'm done, to I'm done for now, that can help a lot. And again, I think burnout also tends to happen cleaning wise when you're dealing with more marathon cleaning, because you do have that huge, you know, you have to expend all of that energy in, with very little break, and you do it all at once and you do get burned out by it. So again, switching your mindset from cleaning being an all or nothing process to, okay, cleaning can be accomplished 5 minutes at a time when it's convenient, when it doesn't interrupt the rest of your life. Um, Being able to say, okay, so, all right, each time I go into the bathroom, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to wipe down the counter. I'm going to put 3 things away. It takes less than a minute. I'm a huge fan of things that take less than a minute, because by the time you're thinking about getting frustrated with it, you're already done. So, if you notice, oh, okay, well, oh, wow, the sink really needs to get wiped out. You're in the bathroom, you wipe out the sink. That's all you have to do. You do not have to keep going. You do not have to do everything. Next time you're in there, you may be like, oh, okay, well, that shelf is super dusty. And you take another 10 seconds and you dust the shelf, and then that's done too. So refocusing on doing very small things much more frequently, I think actually sort of counterintuitively prevents burnout, because you're making it a habit that doesn't take over your life. When you're marathon cleaning, you're staring down everything. Everything is your project, and that is just a recipe for burnout. And by taking things in much smaller chunks and saying, okay, I am giving myself permission to only do this one tiny little thing. All right, so my whole living room is a mess, but you know what? One thing I can do is take 5 things off the coffee table, and then I can be done. And you know what? Your coffee table is 5 things cleaner once you're done. And that's, you're in a better position than you were. And the more you do that, the more it becomes a habit, and the less you find yourself needing to marathon clean because you don't have these giant piles of stuff because you've been sort of chipping away at them a little bit at a time.
So this question could have come from me, this next question. It didn't, but it could have. So I like to clean my house, but I have a habit of moving all the junk into the last remaining unclean room, usually my office, which makes it uninhabitable.
Yeah, the junk room. The junk room is the thing. The junk room, some people have a junk closet or a junk drawer or a junk corner. And it's tough because, and especially when it's a room, you can shut the door and you can just forget it exists for a while. And that is very appealing to be able to do, to be able to say, oh, I don't have to do that. I don't have to, it's out of sight, out of mind. The trouble with that, though, is that you are creating a problem for future you. Present you is saying, oh, I cleaned, I did all this great stuff. And future you is looking back at past you and going, why did you do this to me? Like, why did you leave this for me? And that actually sort of comes back around to don't put it down, put it away. Which I think the reason people end up with a junk room is because there's no real obvious way to put certain things. Oh, I don't really have a home for this thing, so I'm just going to sort of shove it in no man's land for now. I personally am sitting in a room right now that was a no man's land for a very long time. So trust that I understand the process, and how complicated it can be to undo. But you find over time that when you stop looking at that room or closet or drawer or whatever it is as sort of open season for all of your junk, and start thinking every time you handle something, saying, okay, is future me going to need to deal with this at some point? Is future me going to be really mad at right now me for making her deal with it? And the answer is usually going to be yes. So saying, okay, let's take the extra time right now to figure out, does this item have a home? If it doesn't have a home, where is a logical place for it to have a home? Does it need a home? Do I need to keep it? Or am I just relocating it because I don't want to deal with getting rid of it? And I think as you start doing that, you find that you rely on the junk room a little bit less. And a big way to sort of help yourself avoid the junk room is keep the door open. As soon as you shut that door, you're giving yourself permission to pretend it doesn't exist. So keeping the door open is a little bit of a trick to say, okay, it's there. All that stuff is there. All that stuff needs to be dealt with. But I think, also looking at it, the question involved in office, what else could you be doing with that space? How could you be utilizing that in a way that actually makes you happy instead of stressing you out or, making you just want to pretend it doesn't exist? So there's a lot to sort of prevent yourself from falling back on that. And it's a very, very common thing. If you have extra space, that extra space is almost always going to be filled with stuff you don't want to deal with right now. So, I encourage people to, as you're about to take that one item and stick it in that room and shut the door on it forever, to say, okay, should it go in here, or is there a better place for this to go? Is there something that makes more sense, or do I need to get rid of it? Is this something I even need to be hanging on to, and I'm just putting off that decision for later? So it's really about being a little bit kinder to future you.
Yeah, I know present me gets mad at past me a lot because I'll say, I know I have that. Where did I put it? I can't find it. I need to use it right now. It's
Mhm.
probably in a closet somewhere.
Yeah.
And then you open the closet door and you're like, oh my gosh,
Yes, there's everything, and it's all falling
that's
on me.
everything I own is in
Mhm.
this one closet and it's all going to fall out. And then I have to put it away again. So
Yep.
yeah,
And there's
that's
there's there's a lot to be said too. Actually, that just sort of triggered something too. Was when you're trying to figure out where to store stuff, think about where you're going to be when you need to use it.
mm-hmm.
And that's, I think a lot of people forget that part of it, that, where's the first, if you're like, okay, I need this item and I need to use it right now, where does your brain say, this is where I want to grab it from? Because that's probably the most logical storage space for it. And it may not be the traditional place to put things, but I always say it's like the hamper thing. if you constantly end up, for some reason, someone in your household tends to always throw their dirty clothes in the corner of the living room, wherever, outside the bathroom, whatever it happens to be, put the hamper there. It may not be the traditional place to put a hamper, but you put the hamper there, you're not going to have a pile of clothes there anymore. It's much easier to adapt your solution to the behavior than it is to adapt the behavior to the solution. So,
Yeah.
that's something I really encourage.
Yeah, that's really great advice too. So I should be taking notes anyway. Um,
We're recording, just watch
I
it
know
over.
I can watch it again. All right. So this is our last question. I recently moved to a new space much smaller than the previous. How does one decide what to keep, what to pitch when dealing with a lifetime of memories?
So this is where we get back into the emotional association of our stuff. And we have so much emotion tied up in our stuff, whether that's sentimentality because of, somebody gave us this item, or guilt because, oh, I really hate this thing, but I can't get rid of it because it was a gift, or this worked really well where I used to live, but I don't love it in my new place. And there's also this, like, the sunk cost fallacy, where it's like, well, I spent money on this, so I have to use it even if it's no longer serving me. So again, there's all of this emotion that's wrapped up in it. And when you're downsizing in space, you do need to make some decisions about what comes with you, what needs to go, and how you prioritize that. A lot of people will say, oh, get a storage unit, and put the storage room it's just a junk room you never have to deal with. And that's, that's terrible.
Plus, you're
You're
paying for it.
plus you're paying for
So
it, which is awful. So I think, the sentimentality of it makes things a little bit more complicated. With gifts, I'm a big believer in, once you have received the gift, it's yours. It's yours to do with whatever you want, whether that is regifting it, donating it, getting rid of it. If it is not something that you enjoy, will use, if it's not something you want to have around, you are not emotionally obligated to keep that item. It's the real emotion in a gift is in the giving and the receiving of it. It's not actually imbued in the item itself. So the item itself it is what it is. It's the emotion of the person who gave it to you. It's your emotion as you received it. Beyond that, you can get rid of stuff. Take a picture of it if you want, so that you have a memory of it. That's a big one for sentimental things. People are saying, oh, I've got all my kids' artwork since, the beginning of time. Like, what do I do with it? You can photograph it, put it together in a collage, find ways to still honor those things without having to actually physically hold on to them. If my mom told me she was still holding on to my artwork from kindergarten, she never would, but if she did, I'd be really upset with her about it. But I think looking at your life as it is now in your new, smaller place, and really saying, okay, what do I have that's necessary? What do I have that serves me in this environment, as opposed to where I was before? And if you can, if it's things like furniture, maybe you can make somebody else's day a little bit better by passing that along. If it's something that you have no use for anymore, but someone else can find useful. There's a lot of ways to deal with it, but I think, again, it's understanding that all of the emotion that we have tied up in our stuff it's changeable. You can detach the emotion from the item itself, and still feel the sentiment toward the person it's associated with, or the memory that it's associated with, without necessarily needing to have the actual physical item itself. And that's a tough one. People have a very hard time. You find it a lot when, say somebody passes away and their house is full of things that their family just doesn't want to get rid of in any way. And you don't need those items to remind you of the person. You have your memories independent of the stuff. And being able to detach the emotion from the actual item itself, I think is a very important first step in being able to decide what you need in order to continue with where you are now in life, as opposed to where you were when that stuff was more important to you.
It's interesting when you say that. So my great grandmother passed away. It's been quite a while now, but my mother had to clean out her house. And ever since she's done that, she's been much better about not trying to pass stuff off to me,
Yep.
because she realizes that at some point I'm going to have
To
to,
deal with it. Yep.
it's like a cycle there. And
Yeah.
I've also gotten very good about telling her gently but firmly that I appreciate the gesture, but I don't have the space for that. I'm not going to use that. Somebody else will probably love it.
I
If
think
you
I
don't,
think for,
yeah.
especially for people with aging parents and parents who are downsizing, you have to really learn how to say no
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of that, because and they mean it as a gift. It's not just that
Absolutely.
they're trying to unload their possessions on you. It's that, this is something that meant a lot to them, so they want it to mean a lot to you.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to have the vocabulary to say, I appreciate the sentiment behind it, I don't have space for that. I don't think it'll fit with my life. I don't think I have room for it. Can I help you find someone else
Mm-hmm.
or another way? Do you think we can help maybe find someplace we can donate that to, where it might be more used and appreciated?
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's very difficult to say no, as those things come up. But I think it's a skill that, as we age,
Mm-hmm.
and our parents and grandparents and all of that age, that you just have to sort of say, okay, this isn't just going to be an ongoing avalanche of stuff going from generation to generation. At some point, somebody's got to stop the process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's going to be me and my
Yep.
family. So anyway, well, those were all the questions that we had submitted. Do you have any other advice for us that you haven't touched on, or anything you want to say to wrap it up? Or
I mean, I really think that, for a lot of people, you know, cleaning can be a really overwhelming prospect. It's a very difficult thing for some people to do, and it can be very overwhelming. It can be very emotional. So I just encourage people, through both of my books, to re-examine your relationship with cleaning, and really look at, why do I have difficulty doing this? Where am I getting hung up with this? Where are my roadblocks? What's stopping me? Is it emotional? Is it physical? Is there some history there that I need to deal with before I can move on? And just understand that, we live in a world of these beautiful Instagram homes, and it seems like everybody's got just the perfect space and everything. And if I can accomplish one thing with my work, it's to help people understand there are way more people who don't live like that than there are who do. And everyone who does, who has a mess, who's ashamed of their home, who can't have people over, who does, nobody should have people over right now, but in general can't have people over. That it's so common, but nobody really ever wants to talk about it. So what I try to do is encourage a dialogue where people acknowledge, hey, you're not the only person out there who's having this challenge right now. You're not the only person who looks around at your living room and just wants to burst into tears, because what are you going to do with all of this stuff? Like, it's a very common, it's almost universal. But everybody's given the impression that nobody else lives like that, and tons of people live like that. So being able to shift your perspective, and also shift your standards as well. Turn your home into some place you're happy to hang out. Don't try to turn it into that Instagram person's, gorgeous backdrop. And like, I follow a lot of pet accounts, and they're always taking like floor level shots of their pets.
yes.
And I'm like, where is the pet hair? Like, I have 2 dogs. Where is the dog hair? So being able to sort of re-examine your standards as far as, okay, this may not be something that I'm going to publish for the entire world to see, but does it make me happy? Can I live like this? Is this something that, do I live in an environment that makes me calm and peaceful, and really want to spend time there? That should be your priority, not trying to keep up with everybody else in this highly curated, I should add.
Hmm.
You are not seeing the wide views of people's homes. You are seeing very narrow slices of what they want you to see. And I think it's important to remember that, but also to understand that way more people's houses look like yours than look like theirs. So,
I think that's really timely advice as well as more people are working from home and schooling from home. Your house needs to be comfortable for you because you're spending a lot more time there than you used to. And, you know, life is overwhelming. Do what you can do.
yep.
So,
And that's
yeah.
that's what it is. It's do what you can do and understand that your limitations exist, and you can work with them. You don't have to push yourself past what you can do. You can just do what you can do, and that's better than doing nothing. Every little bit of progress is a victory. And you should really see it that way rather than beating yourself up for what you didn't get done.
Well, thank you for being with us, Rachel. And if anybody wants to read copies of her books, we do have them available at the library for checkout. So, and thank you. This is great advice. Now I feel like I want to go home and, put some things away.
Well, good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, you have a great
All
day.
right, thanks.
Thanks.